Hi, I'm Josh from Workflow Power. Today, we're going to be running through how to build a coaching solution and workflow on Monday.com. I'm going to take you step by step the structure, why to create it like that, and how to do it. If you want to get access to this pre-configured solution, you can click the link below in this video. It's available to install via one click. You can customize it depending on your requirements and follow along with our kind of tips to do it yourself. Now, really the advantage of today is to follow along and understand why and how you should build out a coaching solution. You can take examples from this structure, apply it to your own workflow, and really enhance and customize how you're going to deliver and how you're going to manage that process within Monday. So let's hop into what this is going to look like. Now, the first thing that I want to do is to create a new workspace. And now within that workspace, I'm going to start with my folder structure. I always believe that folders are a really good starting point to be able to organize and simplify what your workflow looks like. It helps just organize up front and reduce overwhelm. So what we want to do is we want to go through and create some folders. Our first one here is called CRM. We're going to follow that with our overview and onboarding, our coach internal folder, into clients external, then down into our template folder for our potential board that we're going to use for external facing, and then our document templates. Once we have all those folders created, that's really our start point to begin the commencement of our workflow. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to start systematically creating the boards that live within this particular process. Now, the first one I want to start with is holding client information. If you've used Monday before, you're aware that there's potentially different products. There's a CRM product. You could build an entire lead sales funnel process in the Monday CRM tied to this particular workflow. So in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a client board. This client board is going to hold key information about all of our clients. Now, why we want to hold a client board is that one, it helps us retain key information about those clients. It can also be a workflow initiation point, and then it can also be really good potential reporting mechanism as we want to look at potential data points on our clients. So the first thing you're going to see here is we're going to create some different groups. So we can create an inactive, we'll create an active column as well. Then we'll start to go through and we'll start to create some specific columns related to these groups and the clients in this board. You can see here we can have a business name, email, phone, status. We've got a workflow trigger and a creation date. Again, you could create a form view and you could use that as a sample kind of onboarding to collect information, to hold that data when it starts. Say, for example, it's key information about their goals or things that you're tracking or KPIs, or just really centralized information that you want to hold about that client. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at obviously punching some dummy data in here. So let's go through and start to think about like what that sample information can look like. And as we punch this in, we'll start to see it populate. We can see into our active group down below here. So let's push our active group up to the top and we can start to see some of that data. Now you can see you could have an individual in here. Maybe sometimes they have a business. Maybe you're not in that kind of coaching industry where it's more B2C or consumer based and you don't have to have a business. You can obviously customize this in a way that makes sense. This is a really simple starting foundation point, but the client's board is super critical as we move through the workflow. The next board that I'm going to focus on is where we start to think about more of what is the structure of our workflow and how we're going to initiate and manage it. So after we've got our clients board in our CRM folder, we're going to move down into our overview and onboarding. So as we go from new client to new client, most of the time there's an onboarding process. We're going to combine that all in our master overview. So we can see in this board, we're going to start off with the creation of groups. If you follow along, the logical structure approach is workspace, folder, board, and then start thinking about your groups and columns before you get into the details and intricacies around like automations and all that kind of stuff. Start with structure, keep it simple, and then scale up from there. Now, as we create these groups, we're going to move them around just so they're in line with our kind of logical flow. You may want to change the colors so they match the statuses of kind of things that are happening. And then we're going to go through and we're going to add some columns. Now we're going to look at potentially, you have multiple coaches. So maybe we want to have a lead attached to that client and their potential overview. Maybe we want to track the period they're engaged for. Status. We also might want a workflow trigger that's going to create that external facing client portal. And then maybe an email to run automations and different things like that. You'll notice in this board, what we're really focusing on is overview and zoomed out picture. What's important to segment the client from this master overview kind of location or view within our workflow is that we could have one client that maybe is engaged in multiple types of services and we want to track them differently on that overview. That's why we would separate and segment out structurally where our clients sit, where we want to see our overview and how that's placed. So in this example, you can see we've shoved some demos in terms of potential businesses or customers that may work within this overview. We want to track potentially their engagement dates. We want to assign a lead, and then we want to track their status. Now that's really our zoomed out picture of what's happening across our workflow connected to our client. The next thing that we want to do is we want to go down and we want to create an internal coach board. So we're going to create a board here that's called internal coach. And this is where we want to hold some of those internal activities. So those internal activities are super important because obviously as a business or a coach, you have internal things that need to get executed that you don't necessarily want the client to see. Now that's what we're focusing on here is how to get these tasks in and manage them, but also how can they connect to those external collaboration points that we're doing with our particular clients. So you can see in here, what we'll do is we'll have a new task in to allocate. Maybe we have client specific tasks. We have then administration and internal. We have our columns that we're then building related to this workflow. So obviously someone who is responsible for the task. We've got due dates. We might have a status to track what's happening activity wise, and then any other columns that make sense. As we start to build out this workflow, you'll start to see like how structurally we want to keep it really simple. Say for example, I'm a coach and I have 10 clients. They've got their own kind of client portals where we interact with them. We still want to make a simple place for us to be able to manage our internal tasks and how we can connect tasks that the client's seeing into our own singular view. And that's what we're going to focus on as we work through this structure. We're going to add some sample tasks in here. So let's add some sample tasks that might live in this board, and we're able to push some more as well from our external kind of client-facing templates. After we create these items, you can see we've chucked a few in here in terms of what they would look like. Maybe we just have these real generic specific tasks that are related to our overall business or our set of coaching clients, but then we're going to have more detailed things related to clients. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through now and create our client portal. And this is one of the key parts of this workflow. So obviously we want to collaborate with clients. We want to make it easy to share information with them. We want to build out different portals in a way that's going to make sense structurally for our workflow. and is going to, give us the information that we want to see. So our client portal template can be a structure, again, that can be fully customized. In this example, while we build something out, what we're really focusing on is the ability to provide a place for people to come into, for them to see exactly what's happening, and for us to collaborate with them. So you can see here, we're going to go through and create a couple of groups. So let's create, goals, KPIs, success indicators we want to track. Let's move this one up to the top. Maybe we then also want to change the color. We'll then move our archived activities down to the bottom. And we may want to track things like, what are our current tasks that we're working on? Let's change the color of this one so it's different from our future tasks. We then want to add some columns. So obviously who's responsible, a status, maybe due dates, what month it falls into, any files, any links. We'll show you how to kind of link up your workflow to that internal one. Maybe you want to track KPI metrics around different things that are happening for that particular client, different ways you can structure it, percentage to goal. All that information can be really useful in terms of tracking the information that you want to see. Now, as we go through this workflow, we're going to start building the connections now that make sense as we start to work through what this looks like. Now, again, don't be too concerned about the details at this point. If you want to access the solution, again, we have this fully built out customized solution with all the automations. This video's purpose is really designed to give you an idea on the best way to structure your workflow when thinking about offering coaching and how you want to manage it in Monday. If we go right back up to the top into our clients, the first thing that we're going to do is we want to create a connection down to our master overview. So let's go down here and let's click connect boards. We're going to select a board and we're going to choose our master overview. And we're going to create a two-way connection. So it creates the column here and it creates the column in the master overview. Now this is going to let us just see, data from our client in our master overview, and accordingly, if we want to ladder up anything that's happening, anything we're tracking across different projects or client-facing collaborations, we can do that against the client really easy. For example, we might want to see what services are attached to them, what's their progress on their current set of activities. All that data can be laddered up against the client when we have multiple executions or coaching programs happening. So as we go down here, we can see we have a link to our clients. So we've got clients. Maybe we also now, for example, we want to look at our master overview and we want to think about tracking our onboarding down at this individual level. So let's say we have in here our onboarding task 1, onboarding task 2, and we also want to track the progress of this. So let's add a progress column down at this level, and let's show this up against this summary here. So let's call this onboarding progress. So we've now got a summarized column for our onboarding that can live here against our master overview, but that may be something we want to pull back into our client view to make sure that we can see, well, who's onboarded and who hasn't. So we can pull that in as a mirror column here, and we'll call this onboarding. And we've set up our basic start point automation connection point. The next thing that we want to do potentially is we want to maybe automate that creation down here of those onboarding tasks. So we go into our automations, we're going to click create from scratch, and we're going to say when item created, we're going to create some sub items. So let's create sub item 1 and let's call it onboarding task 1. And then let's call the next one onboarding task 2. So let's click create, and we've now got our automation created. that is going to create those onboarding tasks underneath there. So that effectively gives you a template for your onboarding process. I always find containing it within that master overview is really useful because it's such a connected workflow. That gives you the ability to do it easily, but also see what's happening. Now, the next automation we're going to add is our initiate onboarding. So we go from a client, potentially we have a form here connected. We input the client comes in through our kind of sales or lead process. We then want to create another automation to, let's say, when status changes, when onboarding changes to yes, let's create an item in our master overview board and let's connect them together. So let's find our master overview and we want to create an item there. So I'm going to use the item name, and maybe I also want to map in the business name if it exists. I'm going to get rid of the status here. I'm going to click done. I'm going to connect both boards with our master overview column and click create. So what that's done is that's given me an automation that says when I change this to yes, I'm going to create an item in the overview board and I'll link the two together. So when I go to Jeff here and I say yes, we're going to create that item ready to onboard over in our master overview. It's going to connect it in here. It's already giving me the onboarding progress because it's automatically created my two sub items on creation. Now you can see how simple that was to set up, how that structure is starting to flow, and how we can start to visualize information up in our hierarchy. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into our client portal template and we're going to think about that same connection point back into our internal tasks. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to click connect boards. I'm going to select boards. I'm going to find my internal coach, create a two-way connection, and then click connect boards. What that's going to do, it's going to connect this template structure that we're going to use, and it's going to pull that into our internal coach admin, and we're going to use an automation that can sync anything across our external client into one singular view for us really easily. Now, after we've done that, what I want to do here is I want to bring in the internal status. So I'm going to mirror in the internal status here. So I'm going to call it internal status. And I've now got something that can be utilized for an automation inside this potential template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to automate. I'm going to look for one of my status automations. So let's go down and try and find status. We've got potential status up the top. So let's go and look for the one we want to use. And let's look for status. Let's just type in status. What we're really kind of looking for is when status changes to something, we want to change something else. So let's scroll down until we can kind of find it. So on status, let's see if we can find our example here. Essentially what this automation is going to do, it's going to, when we have something linked in here, say for example it's this, when this goes to completed, it's going to automatically update the status in this external facing client board to completed. So giving you kind of that two-way sync. That's a pre-built kind of standard automation that you can find in that kind of Monday library. When that's established, it will create that connectivity. Now, the next thing we want to do with our structure in our template is we have a bunch of different options. So
You may look at, for example, creating filtered views. So let's create a table here. And let's create current tasks. We can kind of pin this and we can filter it. So let's just say we want to see current tasks that are outstanding. So when we go into this and we add a task, this is kind of what the client would see, and they would see these internal kind of views. What we can also do is we can hide these columns that aren't applicable. So we can start to turn columns off in these particular views that don't make sense depending on what's required. For example, if we have a goals view, so let's say we create another one and we call it goals. We can then filter that just to show the goals. And maybe we also are hiding specific columns. In this example, we want to see the KPI metrics. So you can see how we're starting to build out not just a working board, but we're building a portal that the client can access. So we may go through here and we may create a chart, and then you may want to add other widgets to this, which effectively becomes a dashboard. And you can see how much more engaging this will be for the client with these defined views and ways of working. The next thing that we want to do is we're going to create that automation that's going to sync things over to our internal coach. So very similar to before, we're going to say when our sync to internal changes to yes, we want to create an item in our internal coach, and let's link that. And let's create that item, give it a name. Let's not map the owner or the status. Now, this is really useful, really just when you have an external facing collaboration point with a client, maybe use this in the whips, maybe use it in the sessions where you're coaching. And as information goes in here and you want it to sync internally, it would come in like this and you would go, yep, that's an internal task that I want to track. It's going to push that over to your internal coach admin board, and we can see that it gets put in this new task to allocate. Now, importantly, what we would recommend having here is we have another connect boards column. Now, this connect boards column internally can be connected to my client database. So as I do this, I can pick up what client this relates to. Now, a really useful thing I can do here is I can go to the settings of this and I can turn off the functionality to link multiple items. I can then create another table view. So let's rename this and call it client view, or let's call it clients. And what we can do is we can group by, and we can group by those clients. So as I start to add more tasks that are related to different clients from my database, so you can see as I start to link all these up, what the clients these are related to, I can start to split off what activities are for what client and what are we working on. So it gives you a real good differentiation or delineation between what's a client task, what's administration internal, and then you can really get those really synced views that make sense around what's happening across each client. Now, once you have this structure set up, the client portal template is where you can obviously define exactly structure-wise what you want this to be, and then what views you want in here. And then your goal is to then go and save this as a template. So this becomes, that core part of your workflow, and it becomes repeatable. So let's just set up a standard template here. Let's call it type template example. And let's click create. Now, as that goes through and creates a template, it's important to know you can have multiple templates. What I would recommend is always starting with a foundation structure that you think is like, here's the thing that everything really needs. And then we want to customize that based on the different clients or the different services we provide or how you want to engage with them internally. That becomes a good foundation.
Again, what we want to do here is link this initiate client portal to that client facing example here to create an external view to collaborate with our clients. So in our master overview, we'll go to automate, we'll go create an automation, and we'll say when our status changes, initiate client portal changes to yes, we want to create a board from a template. So we'll go through, we'll create our coaching our client portal template example. We can map the name here. So we want to map the name that's in our master overview. And let's put it in a folder. Let's put it in our client external folder. And we'll click done and we'll click create. So we've now created a really simple structure, but you can see that we're layering on functionality. So automations, we're going back to, we're thinking about how boards are connected to each other within this structure, and then layering on that functionality. So in this example, what we would do is we say we click yes. It's going to look, okay, we've gone through our onboarding. We've completed that process. We now want to pick up our client template and we want to create a new project. Now it's going to inherit obviously the structure of our template that obviously isn't complete, but I'll show you a complete one. And this is where we're going to be collaborating with the client externally in Monday. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the type of that board now to shareable, which means we can invite an external guest in and they'll only see this particular board they're invited to. We can click our invite option up the top here and we can invite a board guest to collaborate with us. We've now set up essentially a portal that is connected to our internal tasks, that can be connected to our overview level, and also brings in data related to the client in a really seamless way. Now ensuring that anything you do in here is reportable, ladders back up, can connect to your internal tasks as well. Now I hope that structure has really given you some ideas or some foundations to build on. When we go through and we look at what this can kind of look like, in this full solution that you can see here is the example of what you'd receive when going through this structure and building it out via the installable link. So you can see, as we mentioned here, we've got our client list where we can initiate onboarding, our connection down to the onboarding. We can use our client form to enter new clients. That could be a standardized way to receive information. Obviously, our master overview contains our detailed onboarding process that we want to track, our link to our kind of customer or our client, and then how we initiate our client portal. If we go down and we look at our client portal, you can see this is where we can have a default view that represents documentation that we track or hold related to that client, KPIs and key success indicators, which really becomes a key thing that you want to report on and track and ensure there's like collaboration on, and obviously tasks. The ability to import new tasks, dashboard and report, track those goals and KPIs really easily in a metric way, track current and future tasks, get potentially a monthly view of what's happening month by month. So if we split that out, you can see us now popped into July. Maybe we have a calendar view that represents when different things are happening at different points in that cycle. You can see that portal can be very highly customized, and this base that we give you is really flexible in terms of what it can do. You can see in our automations that we discussed, when something changes in our internal coaching board, it's going to change the status in here. So you have a seamless sync when you have 10, 20, 30 clients. Things ladder into your internal coach board, and as you update them, they automatically update those external facing boards. So really powerful. So we can see here we've got our internal tasks of different things that we're tracking, things that have come from clients, so our client tasks that can pull into our client view, and our really like seamless way to structure and manage this. Hopefully this has given you some example like solutions in terms of how you can structure this coaching solution in Monday for your business. Love to hear your feedback, things that you've built from it, anything you're not sure of that you want help with structuring. Please ask us in the comments, or I'm excited that you're able to access the solution, customize that, and build out a full coaching solution and workflow that makes sense for your organization.